Well, I didn't know how many people to expect here today. I thought maybe 6 or 8 until I heard free food was available. Then I knew there would be a big crowd. I have found food to be the only inducement that students find believable. I stand before you in my fishing togs. I was in southern Chile until the day before yesterday, fishing for trout. And coming home, I had expected to stop in Boston to pick up my corporate governance togs, which tend to be pinstripes and red ties and shiny shoes, because you can't talk about corporate governance unless you're dressed up and look as if you're an executive. So I'm quite ill at ease in these togs. I need the support of a costume. So try to think of me as in my suit and tie. It's wonderful to be back in the city where I grew up. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and for many years labored under the belief that Pittsburgh did not have an accent. But even recently, I have heard myself recorded, and I said to myself, that fellow is from Pittsburgh. People in Boston talk funny, as you know. So it's nice to be back in the city where you pronounce the words the way they're spelled. And it's also nice to be back at this university. As you know, I have all my degrees from Carnegie Tech, back when it was, as we say, the real Carnegie. Then you sold out to the Mellons. MIT would be willing, for the right price, to sell out to anybody, but we haven't found the right price yet. I was given 3 degrees on the mistaken impression that I had learned all the things they were trying to teach me. But I have the degrees anyway, and so I come away with a very high regard both for Pittsburgh and for Carnegie, and it is an opinion I share widely with many people. People in Boston can't imagine anyone living in Pittsburgh. And I often ask them if had they ever been here. Of course they haven't. But I tell them they would like it and might even move if they had the chance. I think you are all wise to have chosen to be here. It's a great place, and I know you will all go on to do great things. Now, you've heard only a brief smattering of my various accomplishments. I study my resume with great care and applaud. I always hand it out to my students, asking them to be impressed. I've done so many things. I tell my students that when they get as old as I am, they will have done many things. So my resume is more a testimony to my longevity, I think, than perhaps anything else. You will discover from my resume that in my various careers, I have drifted a bit. My early careers were based largely on applied mathematics, which, by the way, I recommend to all of you. I know you're exposed to a bit of that here. And then in my middle careers, I drifted toward the softer sciences of economics and psychology. And in my latter days, I now deal in matters which are almost purely a matter of opinion. And I draw on what is alleged to be my vast experience to share with people who do the real work of the world. And I'm not sure that's progress, but it's my progress. That's what's happened. So I was invited here today, as I understand it, to share my opinions. And that's what I will do. And lest you think that my opinions are limited to corporate governance, I should let you know I have opinions about everything. all of which I'm happy to share. So if you have questions on any subject, I'm ready. Now, most people, most sensible people, only think about corporate governance when some outrage occurs. An economy collapses because of corruption. A corporation collapses because of skullduggery. A CEO is vastly overcompensated. And we see these events with great frequency in the morning papers. It used to be, now, as you may know, I teach a course at MIT about corporate governance, and I should tell you there's nothing like the sound of your own voice to persuade you that you know what you're talking about. And I have now taught it often enough that I'm certain I know what I'm talking about. But we read about these things, and then we just go back and wonder why they allowed these things to happen. How did they decide to pay the CEO that much? How did they allow this corruption to occur? How did they? But that takes about 15 minutes for our outrage to die down, and we go back to work and do what we do every day, and then the next morning we read the newspapers and discover it's happened again. And it's a very reliable sequence. It used to be, when I taught this course, I would find particularly egregious examples of these things, and I would make clippings and throw it on iFile on the floor, make a pile, and when it came time to teach the course, I'd put these things together and sort them in the order of their badness. And I finally decided it was just a waste of time. And I then shifted to knowing that on the morning of class, I could find in this morning's paper an example good enough for my purposes. So these things happen. They happen with great regularity. Now, what do we do about all that? Well, most of us do nothing. We fume, we sputter. We say, how could this happen? These terrible people, why are they doing it? And they make all this money, but we do nothing, nothing. Occasionally, lawmakers rouse themselves, driven by some outrage or other, to pass a new law, the Sarbanes-Oxley being the latest example. Well-intended, totally probably ineffective, but well-intended, maybe does a little bit of good. I'm all for doing good, and maybe it does a little. And much earlier stage, we passed the Sherman Antitrust Act. I'm sure it did some good, a little bit of good, but it certainly hasn't eliminated the news in the morning newspapers. They are still reporting outrages. And I am here to confess, I have no cure. I have no cure. These outrages will persist. They will recur. You read the paper tomorrow, you will find a new one. I neglected to clip this morning's newspaper, but I'm sure I could have found one which would be an example today. So I have no cure, and the result of this is I have no publication record on this subject. I write deeply insightful essays, which I read to myself, and I say, that fellow really understands. But I don't write anything that you would find particularly, I don't know what, impressive or insightful. So the question is, what do I do to help, if anything? The answer is, I do what I'm doing today. I have the opportunity, by luck, as much as anything, to have access to students at MIT. I could equally well do it here with the same degree of optimism, who have arrived there through an incredible selection process. They started in every corner of the world. They were the best students in their elementary school, their junior high, their high school. They went by dint of great sacrifice to the best universities they could find. The best of those come through another selection process, and they are, like you and like me, lucky people who have somehow drawn favorable cards, favorable genes, favorable parents, favorable opportunities, and you're here with the best prospect in the world of influencing events. There's no better bet than you. And I think if I can transmit to that group of students some tiny insight into ways this problem could be resolved, I can't do better. I think if I wrote a book, people would read it, but I have more confidence in my ability to look you in the eye and make you understand what needs to be done without telling you how to do it than any other method. So when I teach my course, I ask my students to write me a paper every day. And I remind them frequently that shorter is better than longer, because I read them all. And I have about somewhere around 65 or 70 students. And I see these papers as a form of conversation, because I get them midweek by email, of course. I read every one of them, make notes on every one, and pass them back. And we have a conversation through these papers. As a result, I have a little bit of a gauge of whether the students are learning anything. Can anybody share a bottle of water with me? Maybe. There's one. Thank you. Great. And so I tell my students that in addition, I give them a paper every class. But in the last class, I tell them I have one last assignment for you. The world is not very well organized. We see all kinds of evidence of difficulty. People blowing each other up, shooting each other, leading movements of vast destruction. And I say, it's clear that governments lack the capacity to control all these evil influences. And it seems to me that organizations of some form or other, whether business or otherwise, are the context in which most of us live most carefully. They tell us where to live, how much we're going to be paid. They provide meaning for our lives. And as graduates of this school or MIT, you will go to work in those organizations, and if you can make them more effective, you will provide people real opportunities other than shooting each other for their energies and their abilities. So I leave my students with one last assignment, which is to go out and help save the world. And when they email me, as they often do in later years, I always end my email by saying, would you send me a brief report on what you have done to help save the world? And I tell them, to be honest, I don't care whether they make a lot of money or whether they become famous, although I am not disappointed when they do those things. But I teach them in the hopes that their work will do some good. So that is my final assignment, and will be, you will not be surprised to know, your final assignment. But now we're going to get to governance. You had thought I'd forgotten the subject. Okay. Now, I'll start with an observation that will lead to a definition. Governance is a widely bandied about word. Most people don't know what it means, which allows me to define it for myself. So I start with an observation. Every organization will talk about businesses. The title is corporate governance, but I would like to think about business, not corporation. Corporation's a business, but there are many other kinds of businesses. But every corporation, every business has two things in common. One is a CEO. Now think about it. It's a peculiar thing. Organizations take thousands of different forms, but all of them have a single CEO. Now, somebody will put up his hand and say, oh no, some have two CEOs. That lasts 15 minutes. And one of them kills the other, and now we have one CEO. Okay? So every business has a CEO, a constant. And if you think about businesses, every business has an owner. Okay? Now, in some cases, the owner is complicated. It could be the state. We know there are state-owned enterprises in many parts of the world. There are organizations where the owner is a group of faceless shareholders numbering in the millions. There are corporations that are owned by nonprofit groups. There are organizations owned by families, by individuals, by all kinds of people. But if you think about organizations, I think it is very useful to start with the owner. Ask who owns it. And it's sometimes tricky to figure out. We don't have a lot of time, but if you're interested, I could give you references to people who have done studies of how organizations are owned around the world, and they differ greatly. But we can't go into all that. Okay. Now, so as the length of my resume suggests, I come from a bygone era. I do not use PowerPoint. But I'm even worse than that. I don't even use overhead slides. I use chalk. But I don't do the work. I detect an artist. This gentleman right here is going to be my man. Are you ready?
Yes.
Are you excited about this possibility?
I will be soon, yes.
Perfect, perfect. You are my man. Where's the chalk? There it is. Okay. Now, CEO, right CEO. This is why I always ask students, they write better than I do. And up here, write owner. If this is becoming too complex for you, raise your hands and I'll go more slowly. Okay? Now, in the typical organization, that's it. The owner and the CEO are the same person. They run the pizza parlor. They run the barbershop. They do the work of the world. That is the business organization that dominates the world. Okay? No governance problem there, folks. The owner and the CEO are identical. Okay, some organizations have, we'll put down here, employees. It's quickly becoming more complicated. I recommend organizations with no employees. You'd like it a lot better. Okay. And some organizations are even careless enough to have executives. Really a mistake. They fit in here.
How do you spell executives?
EXEC. Yeah.
You found an international artist.
Another reason I don't write is I can't spell. These are options. You don't have to have these people, but you do need these two. And some organizations labor under an even greater disadvantage. They have boards of directors, and they fit in here. Is this too complicated so far? Okay, now, this is the artistic part of your exercise. You draw a hoop down here like this. Management. Management is what CEOs do, okay? And all the hierarchy below. That's what CEOs do. That's what you study in this school. That's what we teach in the Sloan School. That's marketing, finance, organization, operations, all those things. That's all we talk about. And the CEO is God. Or thinks he's God, or hopes he's God. But the people down here are led to believe he's God, right? He has vision. He has who? I'll spare you all that. Okay, now draw another. Are you ready? Up. Include this guy. Right. Governance. That's governance. Governance is, if you think about it, the owners own all the assets. The owners own it all. Governance is the way the owners control the use of their assets. And as this curve implies, the owner doesn't control the use of the assets through the employees. He controls the use of the assets through the CEO. Okay? Mr. Steinbrunner doesn't tell Mr. Jeter how to play whatever it is, shortstop, second base, one of those. He hires and fires a general manager or the manager, the CEO. That's how owners control the use of their assets, not very effectively in many cases, and that's what we're going to talk about. So governance is the process by which the owner controls the use of the assets through the CEO, and the CEO does what he does, the CEO does what he does with the owner's assets. The CEO uses the owner's assets. Okay, is this too fast? So my definition of governance is from the owner to the CEO, and management is from the CEO down. So the CEO is the only person in both loops. Now, at the advice of one of my Japanese students, I was encouraged to mess up this drawing a little bit. I prefer mine to his, but he pointed out that the board of directors sees a bit through this line to this level because they're interested in succession. They're interested in what these people think of this person. So they peek through the line, but they don't act through the line. So they suck information across this border, but not a lot. And the executives peek at these people a little bit. They go to meetings and they make presentations about finance or accounting or marketing or whatever. And so there's a little leakage across the line, but if you draw a circle around the directors and these people, that's the folks who kind of run the business. They run the business, and they have at least an awareness of each other. And the CEO is elected to his job by the board, okay? The board, once a year, piously, after having been elected as directors by 97% of the voters in a totally democratic process. Unfortunately, there's only one slate. There are no options. Corporations are run like the well-ordered old Soviet Union, run exactly the same way. Communist Party, 97% of the vote. They elect the CEO. And incidentally, when the time comes, they fire the CEO with a pious vote. They say, vote, we terminate the CEO. All in favor? Done. But the CEO not only runs for office with these people, but he runs for office with these people. Because if nobody is willing to work for the CEO, the board will fire him or her. And so these people also vote for the CEO, but they vote by coming to work every morning. And if one morning they don't come to work, the CEO loses his job. So the CEO has to keep these people amused by providing the capital they need to have fun. And he keeps these people amused by occasionally allowing a dividend to be paid. And if he does that with appropriate amounts, everybody's happy and he's a great CEO. So that's my definition of governance. Governance is here. Now, we should have planned ahead. We'll erase this. Have you all made this chart on your flesh? A tattoo, perhaps. Okay. Okay, now, we're now going to, you proved yourself capable of circles, we're going to do straight lines now. From here to here. Horizontal, straight line. Good. Good. Okay. This line represents all the businesses in the world. They all fall on this line. And we're going to put at this end, we'll put CEO right here, down here, okay? CEO. And we'll put CEO over here. Okay? The line represents all the CEOs in the world. They all fall on that line. Below the line are executives, employees, if any. Imagine all the dangling organizational structures under the CEO as you go across the line. Okay. Owner. Pizza place, barbershop, owner, CEO, same person. Make a dot. All those companies where the CEO and owner are combined. Over here, owner. Okay? Now make a dot. Perfect. Could have been a little to the left. Okay. Straight line. Huh. That's very good. I always draw it the other direction. Yeah. That's better, I think. I'm a lucky draw here. Now, the distance between these lines represents the distance, however you define it, between the owner and the CEO. Okay? Here, the distance is 0. Let's consider General Electric. Between the owner and the CEO, we'll write in financial advisor. It's the pension plan committee. It's the financial advisor, somebody who advises the owner on how to deploy his assets. Then you come down here and you write in institutional investor. The financial advisor says, why don't we put money in the Magellan Fund or the S&P 500 Index Fund or who knows, whatever else. Private equity is becoming fashionable and about to blow up, but we're putting lots of money there. Then we come to the fund manager. Okay? And then we come to the board of directors. This is to illustrate that if you are a shareholder, if you are an owner of General Electric, there is some distance between you and the CEO. The CEO does not know you, and you do not know the CEO. Okay? Now, at this end, there are several other contrasts between these two ends. These people I use this sort of soft term, care deeply about the enterprise, okay? Care. They think about pizza all day long. They think about customers. They think about the dough. They think about the flour. They think about the tomato sauce and the cheese even, most of all. They think about nothing else than the business. Who cares at this end? The owner doesn't know he owns GE. Has no idea. This person doesn't ever think about GE. He thinks about his clients. How am I going to persuade people to pay me my fee for giving him useless advice? So he doesn't care. The institutional investor, he cares about selling his funds. He would like good performance, but good performance of the funds. And he doesn't care what they own. He would like them to own companies whose stock increases in value. That's not his problem. He just wants to sell funds. The fund manager, who has no idea what to buy, but he practices very superstitious rituals to decide, hoping against hope that the funds go up and that he buys from people dumber than he. And so he doesn't care about the company, he cares about the trajectory of the stock price. Then we come to the board of directors. Do they care? The answer is, yeah, sure, they care. But they care in a way that I call professional. They want to do it right. But they have no, as we say in the trade, no skin in the game. It's not their life, it's their reputation. But it's sort of around the edges. It's something they do on the side. And then we come to the CEO, and we ask ourselves, does the CEO care about how it performs? And the answer is, in my experience, new CEOs care, but old CEOs get rich. And they find Davos more attractive than Des Moines. And they drift around the world, and they play golf, and they make speeches to analysts, meetings, and various things. And their attention is known to wander from the performance of the corporation. So you might ask whether anybody cares. These people have the skin in the game. They derive whatever benefit leaks out of the corporation all the way up to them. But everybody else works for a fee. Largely independent of the performance of the organization, has been proven by various academics over the years. So that's that extreme. In between, we start, as the little business here prospers, all businesses start here. Even GE started here. General Motors started here. IBM started here. So everybody starts here. And if the business succeeds, you need cash. So you go to the bank, or you go to your uncle, or you go to your father, or you go somewhere. But suddenly the owner is not identical to the CEO. The distance begins to grow. And then you say, we've run out of money in the family, or maybe we lost it the last time, so we have to start with a new group. You begin to drift out. You get out into people who are like venture capitalists. You know, they're in pretty close here. They give you money, but they keep their fingers tightly around your throat, and usually own about 80% of your equity, and are quick to remind you that you are replaceable in your lofty position as entrepreneur. And then you drift out into the sort of mezzanine financing and private equity groups, and you head off this direction. Now, somewhere along here, you're doing fine, you're getting bad instruction. Draw from right here over to here. That's it. If we'd drawn this properly, that would be horizontal, make your chart more attractive. But anyway, what happens here is organizations decide to sell shares to the public. And so instead of having private owners getting more and more distant from the CEO, you suddenly say, why don't we bring in the unwashed public? They have a taste for returns, and we have this very promising company. We'll make an IPO. So let's sell 10% of the stock to the public. And I think in most parts of the world, that requires you, whether you want it or not, to have a board of directors. You must have a board of directors. So the board of directors starts with the IPO. But the owner, sometimes the owner, founder, is still there. And even though you have public shareholders, the owner is still the owner. He acts as the owner. So control, which has been clear up to here, now becomes a little fuzzy because you don't know whether the control is kept with the owner, the dominant owner, or the new IPO 10% shareholder. But somewhere out in here, people sell control, and the old founders get out. And they turn it over to these folks. Okay? We don't know when that happens. In the case, let's say, of a digital equipment corporation, dearly departed digital equipment, Ken Olsen, who started here, was still running it when he was out here. He ran it cold turkey and had his fingers tied around the throat of the CEO. So even though you have a public company, you don't know that you have a public company. The board is a sort of decorative object that the owner entertains from time to time. Or in some cases, the owner disappears and you only have the folks who come to the party, the directors. Okay, now, this peculiar structure, as far as I can tell, with control, that is where control has been ceded to that group, only exists in the United States. It is a peculiar institution. In Asia, if you describe this structure, they look at you with amazement. How could you run a company with a board of amateurs, of folks who know nothing about the business? And the law in the United States almost requires that directors know nothing about the business. They cannot be suppliers, they cannot be customers, they cannot be financiers, they cannot be lawyers, they cannot be investment bankers. They have to be poets. Poets' perfect qualification. So this structure exists only in the United States, as far as I can tell. You talk to people in Latin America. I'm just back. I could tell you about my trout fishing. That's another subject. They say, we have a great company here. I just was with a good friend in Santiago. He runs a big operation identical to Home Depot. In fact, Home Depot tried to invade Chile and he had them thrown out and bought their stores, and now runs them, makes a lot of money. He says, I have a public company. And he said, what do you mean you have a public company? I'm listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Folks, my friend Jose Luis runs that company as if he owned every share of stock, and he only sends an occasional dividend to New York to amuse them and keep them interested. And he just sends them as much as he thinks they need. It's an act of faith to invest in any corporation, but especially his. And I visited with people in Taiwan one time who are a tough bunch. Guy sitting next to me destroys super tankers that have run out of their useful lives. He chops them up in something like 2 weeks, never taking them out of the water. I don't know how he gets the last piece out, but I didn't ask. He says, you know, it is absolutely amazing. He says, you have a sort of reasonable business here in Taiwan. You hire a lawyer and an accountant, and you print up a kind of document. You can find the form. You print it up. You mail it to New York, along with some shares, pieces of paper printed, nice print, fancy top, meaningless words, big stamp at the bottom. Mail it to New York, and they send you back money. And if you need more money, you send more paper. Endlessly. They'll buy anything in the hope maybe someday you'll send them some money. Anyway, that's the nature of our system. It's a wonderful system. I've lost track. I think I'm finished. No. Let's see. Here we go. Now let's talk about some other. Now this is. Oh, I should make it clear. Who elects the CEO? Who elects this? Who votes? No, excuse me. The board elects the CEO. Who elects the board? What a quaint notion. Do you think shareholders have a vote for the CEO? Not very many. He votes the shares. And if you look at most public corporations, 70% of shares are owned by institutions. And the institutions vote the shares on behalf of the shareholders. So it's even less democratic than you thought. You still get 97% of the votes, but they come from a different place. Okay. Now, that's the static picture. Now we're moving into the second half of the course. We move into dynamics. Now, why, if all businesses start here, right? All businesses start here. They have to migrate through all these various intermediate forms in order to end up here. Why do they do that? Why do they move to the right? If we had a reasonable amount of time, we could work on that for a while, but I'll tell you the answer. They do it for many reasons. Number one, they need money for good purposes. They need money to expand the business, to build plants, to buy equipment, to make the business grow and prosper, which I call useful purposes. And for that, they have to deal with more and more owners of different stripes, banks and private, insurance companies and all those kind of people. And ultimately, they have to deal with the public, and that's where the money comes from. So one reason they move to the right is to get money. But there's another reason they move to the right, and that is the owner who has become rich and has lazy children who he doesn't trust, if he's wise, says, I want to get some money out of this business. I can't continue to bear all the risk. And those of you who are careless enough to study finance know there are two kinds of risk. There's the market risk, which we can't avoid if we are willing to invest. And there's the firm-specific risk, which you can avoid if you diversify your portfolio. Now, these people have undiversified portfolios, and therefore they bear both risks. And therefore, if you were thinking about the value of the company to them, you have to discount the value by the total risk. And these people only bear, round figures, half the risk. So you could imagine they deserve a lower rate of return. So the same asset as it moves across the spectrum through all the forms that it takes, are drawn to the right by decreasing expectations of returns. These people will give you money, twice as much money for the same asset as those people. So the returns go down as you go to the right, and the cost of capital goes down sharply. And the advantage that this terrible structure has is it has access to the cheapest capital in the world, mutual fund shareholders, who invest at the expectation of what, 7, 8, 9%? These people wouldn't give you the time of day for 9%. They're looking for 30%. So if you can find somebody to give you money at 8, you'd sell. So the thing that draws companies from this form into that form, if they're successful, is in part access to cheap capital. And when I talk to my friends in China or Latin America about why they all stop here and never sell control, I tell them that's a quaint idea, possibly the wisest way to manage their business, but they will never get access to cheap capital because nobody trusts them. They think they'll steal it. And the only virtue of this structure, subject to the outrages that you read about in the newspaper, is that it at least is alleged to try to deliver value to the shareholders consistently, and does so with great regularity, with the exceptions that we read about. So there are lots of forces that, an arrow, that take things to the right. Now, when I was a student, I studied at a wonderful university called Carnegie. And to my enormous benefit, I studied chemical engineering. And in chemistry, you never have reactions that go in only one direction. So we need another arrow back this way. So if access to cheap capital draws companies to move to the right and restructure themselves, adapt themselves to get to that final stage, what could possibly draw companies back to the left? Well, we could have a long rhetorical conversation, but I'll tell you the answer. These people don't pay attention. They don't care. Performance declines, not necessarily overall, but in pieces. So chunks break off. And GE decides that the division that manufactures locomotives isn't competitive, so they divest it. And they sell it at a price to private equity. Private equity say, you make the price low enough, I'll buy it. So private equity buys it at a high rate of return. The GE shareholders have lost the asset, which the GE management decided they didn't want. The private equity guys say, you've been treated badly by GE, we love you, we'll give you capital, we'll make you a great locomotive maker, and the minute we get you fixed up, we're going to sell you to the public. And so what you have on the board here is not a direction, but a flow. So companies move this way and back. And if I had the wit and an effective graduate student who was smarter than I am, we could estimate where the optimum performance is. But in my view, GE is just a phase businesses go through. They drift up there when everything is fine and you can sell it to the public. But you are sure once it gets there, it will not be treated well, and it will one day find its way back into the pot of the private folks, only to be repolished and sold back to the public. So that's governance. And I tell my students, governance is a little bit like plate tectonics. Here we are in Pittsburgh, hasn't been an earthquake in 1,000 years. That's true of corporations. Carnegie is on a plate, seems solid. MIT is on a plate, maybe not so solid. And companies are on plates, like AT&T was a plate. It was over there, and the world changed, and all of a sudden there was an earthquake and disappeared. Kodak is in the process of being drawn under a plate somewhere. General Motors, Gulf Oil has disappeared. And so there are tectonic, kind of jerky movements back and forth. And when you read the paper, keep this chart in mind. It's all on there. That's what you read about. You can say, I see what's happening. For example, the Blackstone Group. We read the other day, a semi-respectable private equity investor, guess what? Decided they had access to cheap capital. And they sold it to the public. Or they're trying to sell it. Have they done that yet? I don't know. They're trying to get access to public money. And of course, once they do, the partners in the Blackstone Group are suddenly working not just for themselves, but for the public, and they're becoming more like GE all the time, and I guarantee you the returns will go down. And new private guys will reemerge, and so my thing continues. So that's how it works. That's what's happening, and the outrages all occur on this chart. Now, I know some of you have other obligations, I don't know, but I have even better things to say if you stay. And I think I have till 2. Is that right? But if you leave, I will think less well of you, but not badly. Anyway, so by all means, leave if you need to, or should.
We actually have to free this room up for class. Students that want to continue, we're going to move up to 259, which is right here at the end of the hall.
Okay, this is a test of your interest. Anyway.